Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, Certified Insights, Streamlining the Age Process. Before we get started, some housekeeping notes for you. This webinar will be recorded and you will receive a copy of the recording and the slides after the event. Before we, please use the question and answer function on Zoom to ask questions throughout the webinar. We will have time at the end of the session for answering questions. My name is Sanjay Sen. I'm heading the Sales and Business Development for Environmental Services in SGS India. I am joined by Eleni Policornado, Commercial Director of Synthely, and Phuong Nguyen from SGS Vietnam, who leads the Age Development for Asia region. Our topic today is how you can structure your Age process to be as streamlined as possible. This is applicable for everyone, whether you are in the middle of your certification or whether you are just starting out and thinking about implementing Age certification. Throughout this webinar, we shall share our experience with you from global level and provide guidance on how to best structure your Age certification to maximize your investment and implement it as efficiently as possible. We will share some common mistakes that slow down the process and case studies from around the world from clients who have successfully certified projects in a short period of time. Before we get started, we want to take this opportunity to introduce the Synthely SGS Consortium. Synthely and SGS are two separate companies that collaborate as an IFC Age Global Certification provider. We have worked with IFC since 2015 and have since certified buildings in over 60 countries. Our value is that we integrate everything to make the process as simple and straightforward as possible for our clients and partners. We offer one single contract on behalf of all entities that includes everything needed for its certification, from the audit to certification phase to registration phase. This streamlines the process for companies as they can have one point person and one contract for the entire process instead of having to contact and negotiate with multiple entities. The way we work is simple. In our partnership, SGS acts as the auditor for all projects and Synthely acts as the certifier. We also work with Age experts around the world to deliver an integrated package for our clients. We have worked on Age projects around the world, from offices to retail to the industrial and logistics sector to residential and hospitality sector. Our global auditing team has deep expertise and brings the lessons learned to all our projects. Our model also means our clients get strong technical support during the certification and audit. We deliver initial training during the kickoff meeting and answer questions along with the way by working with the same team of certifiers and auditors on your project. The learnings are also passed through the process and there are time savings. At the end of the day, we want to find savings and pass them on to our clients. We are process people and strongly believe in finding efficiencies of scale and streamlining the process. One of our unique value proposition is our focus on scale. We have developed our own Synthely SGS portfolio process to help implement Age at scale. A big part of this work has been working alongside our clients and IFC to develop processes that make sense for all. If you have any questions about the Synthely SGS model, please put them in the chat and we'll answer them in the chat. I will now hand over to Eleni, who will tell you about structuring your Age certification process. Over to you, Eleni.
Thanks so much, Sanjay. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all so much for joining us today. You'll hear a lot about process, and I'm sorry there aren't that many words that we can use to replace the word process, but hopefully you'll bear with us. But what we really want to do today is talk you through what our experience has been and are global case studies and examples to really help you on your own journey, whether you're at the beginning of it, whether you've already gone through the EDGE certification process, whether you're still just thinking about it. We really think that the lessons we can share can help everyone throughout their entire journey. But before we dive in, we want to take a step back and really look at why EDGE was created in the first place, because the basic principles of EDGE really affect the way that the process has been set up right from the beginning. So IFC created EDGE for one reason: mass market transformation. We have ambitious climate goals, and we really need to implement green buildings at scale. And the way to do that is through EDGE. So EDGE wasn't created to add additional burden to teams or to ask teams to do additional studies and research and work, but really integrate green building design and green building principles into the core of design and construction processes. So that really underpins everything that EDGE asks of the client and everything that's being asked during the self-assessment process. And that's really important when we look at things like documentation and the way that reporting happens, because it's asking you to look at what already exists. The other, of course, unique element of EDGE was this element of instantly quantifiable outputs and really focusing on the data and the numbers, which again plays an important role in what's being communicated, because it's not about any kind of qualitative assessment of efficiency, but really focusing on the numbers, focusing on the performance, and really focusing on that environmental impact. Those two elements are really key in this market transformation, and it is really uniquely placed to allow us to scale green buildings and to really make this vision of having every building on this planet green be a reality. Now, as you heard from my colleague Sanjay, Santali and SGS are certifiers and auditors. So today we're giving you a view from our world. So an understanding of what we as certifiers and auditors look for during this process. And our role is really simple. So if you step into our shoes, there are really three key things that we look for when we are reviewing and auditing EDGE work. So the first thing that we look for is proof. Does this measure that's being claimed exist in the design or the construction of the building? Is there proof that it exists? The second idea is consistency. So is the data being provided consistent across the different elements? So for example, is information about the window matching with how it's then being presented later on with a particular efficiency measure that reflects that window? And finally, is everything clearly explained? Is there clarity in the communication, or is it open to interpretation? Because as certifiers and auditors, we can't allow for things that could be seen one way or the other way. We need to know a yes or a no, not a maybe. And so those three elements are really the way in which we view everything that's being provided to us during the EDGE process. And what is this EDGE process? You might be familiar with this slide. It appears in various EDGE presentations, but it really gives you a broad overview of what the process is to go through to achieve EDGE certification. We have, of course, our preliminary certification stage, so the design phase and the post-construction phase. And during this whole process, the project goes through registration, at which point the EDGE self-assessment is being created. Then that information is being submitted for a design audit if it's going for preliminary certification, where it's being reviewed by the auditor, design documentation, going through the certification, and then following the construction of the building, we have the site audit, site review, and then the post-construction certification. Hopefully none of this is new to you, and this is what the typical process or typical flow of work is. And just as a quick reminder, for anything on the asset level, we have the EDGE certification level and the EDGE advanced level. And then for anyone looking for EDGE zero carbon, we move straight into the operational stage of the building. So that's a year after the building has been built for the zero carbon certification. Now, if we take this as a flow and take a zoom in, if you will, we then move into what is actually happening underneath this flow. And this is where things get interesting. So within the EDGE flow, we have different stakeholders. There's the client, there's the auditor, there's the certifier, and in some cases, we also have an edge expert. Within each of these layers, there's communication between the different stakeholders, there's documentation, and there's assessments that are flowing between each of these layers to reach that final edge certification point. Now, the best way to have a streamlined workflow is to reduce the back and forth between the layers, because back and forth typically leads to delays if you account for the time that someone needs to review something, provide feedback, pass the feedback back. That person then reviews it, makes adjustments, then passes it back. As you can imagine, all of this takes time, it takes resources, and it can cause delays. So really, what our core focus is today, and all the information we're presenting you, is to reduce the amount of back and forth between each of these stakeholders and really streamline the work so that you're going through the process flow as effectively and efficiently as possible. To talk about workflow, to talk about process, we need to first of all go right to the beginning, to the point that you decide you're going to go for edge certification. Because the choices that you make right at the beginning of your process are the choices that affect how you're going to go through the process, how quickly and how effectively you're going to do it. So to maximize your investment in edge and the edge certification process, you need to make certain decisions right at the beginning. And the first and the most important one is, why are you going for edge certification in the first place? What do you want out of edge certification? What are your outcomes? And why do you need them? From there, you're able to determine whether you have the right people involved and who those people are, what your timelines are, and then ultimately how you can step together to get your next steps. Now, you're probably wondering why the why matters in the process, but I'll get to it. Essentially, there are three key whys. Why? There's a lot of whys in that sentence. There's a lot of whys why people go for certification. But from our experience, they typically fall into three categories. We have access to financing. So using the edge certification to access a green loan, to be part of a green bond, or some kind of financial incentive. There's also a commercial aspect. So using it for marketing, for increasing sales. And then finally, there's a sustainability aspect. So using it as verification or validation of your sustainability commitments. Now, the reason why which of these drivers affects your process is because it could affect things like what deadlines you have, which stakeholders are involved, and the ideal process to go through edge certification. And I'll give you an example. Financing tends to be a huge driver for clients that are interested in going through edge certification. If you're going for financing, it's likely that you'll need to go for more than one project for edge certification, because financiers are looking for volume, they're looking for scale, and they want to be able to aggregate a portfolio of buildings into a larger deal to be able to then finance it. Now, if you weren't sure you were going to go for financing in the beginning, you might end up doing 10 edge projects separately. And so you'd have the time needed and the cost needed to do one project times 10, or in this case, let's say 100 projects or 100 buildings. But if you knew that from the beginning, that at the end of the day, what was most important to you was getting access to this financing, and to do that, you would need to get edge certification on your portfolio of buildings, you could structure a process, both using the functionality of the Edge app, as well as the Centali SGS portfolio process, to reduce the effort needed to be able to get to your end goal. And suddenly, what doesn't even fit on the page in terms of the effort needed to go through edge certification for 100 buildings becomes much more manageable, and you identify and find a process that gets you the time savings that you need to get the outcome that you need. And if you're wondering about what kind of time savings are involved in the portfolio side, we're talking about savings in terms of the time needed for the Edge application, the time needed to develop high quality assessments, because the more experienced you are, the faster that entire process goes. Savings in terms of documentation, in terms of replicability in the Edge application, savings in terms of having one client, one point of contact, reduced bureaucracy. There's so many different ways in which when you know why you're going for something in the beginning, you can then structure your process to find savings, and to really develop a process that makes the most sense. Now, I'm not going to go into the portfolio process any further, but if you have any questions, please do feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll get to them in the end. What I want to show you today is really, regardless of what your initial reasoning is to go for EDGE certification and your desired outcomes, there are 3 key principles that you can implement to really help you streamline your process and to really go through the certification process in a quickest way as possible. And that really comes down to 3 areas: laying the foundation in the beginning, so doing the work up front, planning your resources well, and then during the process, communicating. So let's dive into each one of these in a little bit more detail and see what specifics you can take wherever you are in the process and really implement. So the first is this idea of laying the foundation. And again, this ties into what we started with, this idea of what are you trying to achieve? Who are the people that need to be involved? And what information and training do they need to be able to implement EDGE successfully? Now, identifying the key players is very, very important, because oftentimes it's not just your technical person who's doing the self-assessment that needs to be on board. There's a variety of different players within your company that might be holding access to information or be the key people needed for deadlines that you need to get on board right at the beginning. So for example, you might be the person in your company that's going to be doing the EDGE assessment, but there might be 5 or 6 different people that hold the keys to the documentation that you're going to need to be able to implement EDGE effectively. And then there's your finance manager who's in charge of that external deadline, who you will need for certain approvals. So really identifying the players from the beginning and making sure they understand EDGE is an essential point in laying the foundation and ensuring you have a smooth process for certification. So that's not only getting the buy-in and getting the education that's needed in the beginning, but also the EDGE training, really understanding how EDGE works, what information is needed. And all of that is really to point to the 3rd element, which is preparing the self-assessment as early as possible. Now, anyone that's worked with EDGE will know that the EDGE app is one of the most powerful tools that we have, and is really created to be used at the beginning as early as possible as a decision-making tool. And so the earlier that you can start working with EDGE, the earlier you can start putting together that self-assessment, the better your entire process will be. And so part of this laying the foundation is also understanding who needs to get some level of understanding of the application. So who's going to be putting information in, who's going to be putting documentation in, and do they need to go through some semblance of training? Now, there are things like EDGE expert trainings, which are an in-depth 8-hour training that will really give you a deep dive into the application. Not everybody needs to go through that. And in fact, you don't even need to use it to be able to go and put together this assessment. But it can be very helpful to do some kind of training, again, to reduce the amount of time that you're fiddling around in the application and clicking around and getting to know it. It's a very intuitive tool, and you can absolutely do it that way. Or you can go through a training and just reduce the amount of time to be able to then use it effectively. But really asking the questions up front, again, in this initial concept phase, you might not even have decided 100% that you're going to go for EDGE, but you can still use the tool to get an idea of where your project might be. You can still use the tool to start getting that education and training, and really using it to ground your work, again, to be able to reduce the time that you're going to need to go through the EDGE certification process. So if we really think about those elements, one is using the tool to build the assessment as early as possible, whether it's in your concept phase, whether it's your design phase, if it's an existing building and a refurbishment project. Again, just using it to get a lay of the land, to have information. The more data information you have up front, the smoother the process is going to be. Second element is running an internal education campaign. I'm consistently surprised by how many clients we have that during the process let us know that their colleagues have no idea what they're working on. And then things get stuck, because if you're in the middle of your EDGE certification process and then you have to start an education campaign to educate other decision makers in your business about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and why you need specific information, that causes delays. If you can do that up front before you start the process, you're reducing potential obstacles and really streamlining a process. And finally, if you are able to, participating in a training can be really helpful, simply to educate you and reduce the amount of clicking around that you do to really go about it and do effectively. And it doesn't have to be a full Edge Expert training. You could participate in a 1-hour introduction to Edge webinar, which really just gives you the foundations of how to use the app effectively, or you could go for a more full training. But really having someone guide you through this process can really reduce the amount of time that you need. So all of that is in the beginning. This is all laying the foundation for an effective process. Now, once you've decided that you are ready to go, ready to jump into Edge, you then move into this planning phase. And this planning phase is about resource allocation. Again, Edge is a very streamlined and straightforward process, and it doesn't take the amount of time as other green building standards. But it's still a process, and it still does require someone to do the work. So really planning the amount of resources that you need and determining whether you're going to do that in-house or use Edge experts, otherwise known as consultants who are trained in Edge, to do it for you. I think that's one of the biggest pieces of advice we can give you, and ones that we've had many conversations with clients around the world where they haven't done the resource planning and then during the process realize they do not have the capacity internally to be able to deliver the specific project. Again, that's an easily solvable problem, and there are many, many consultants who can help. But if you're able to know that up front and plan and really think through how, who, and how much time an Edge assessment is going to take, you can really reduce the amount of time the certification process takes. So to be able to plan well, you need to figure out what resources you're going to need. You're going to need to figure out what kind of documentation you're going to need and where that documentation sits in your company. And finally, set milestones and deadlines, particularly if you have external reasons why you're going for this Edge certification, like financing or a CSR report. Now, let's start with the resource planning. So to be able to effectively plan your resources, you need to understand how much time it's going to take. So the first step in doing that is looking at how many self-assessments you will need to prepare for your project. So for example, if you have a residential development with 3 apartment types, you'll need to do 3 Edge assessments. If you have a portfolio of buildings of 100 buildings and you're implementing some kind of sampling approach, you might need to do 20 self-assessments. It's really going to depend on your project. And here, this is where Centali and SGS really help you in the planning phase of being able to determine and help you set up your project appropriately, so you know, again, how much effort that's going to be. So once you have an idea of what self-assessments you need to prepare, you'll also have an idea of what kind of documentation you'll need to find. And so reviewing the documentation that you know, using the Edge user guides, and we'll talk about that in a little bit further detail momentarily, to start mapping out and understanding what you have available, what might need a little bit more digging, and kind of connecting the dots. Once you have that, you'll be able to estimate the number of hours that you need to prepare the assessment, knowing the effort needed to find the documentation as well. And then you can compare the workload and determine whether it fits into what you have capacity to do or whether you need a little bit of extra help. Now, in terms of mapping the documentation, the Edge app and the Edge guidance really gives you a sense of what you would need to find. So really understanding your buildings, being able to evaluate what kind of measures you'll be looking at, and then understanding the relevant documentation that you would be required to provide as proof, means you can start connecting the dots and really saying, okay, well, I have this documentation, I have this measure, okay, that could work for that, and really starting to map out what you would need to find. Now, in terms of milestones and deadlines, we would say always work backwards. What is your end target, and when do you need a certification by? Whether that's, again, using a certificate to access financing or using your certificates to go into your sustainability reports, really understanding that final deadline, whether it's internal or external, whether it's flexible or not, and then working backwards to figure out by when information needs to be submitted, what the typical review times are, and again, really who needs to do what. So the first level of putting together the assessment, or this needs to be submitted to the auditor, this needs to be submitted to the certifier, etc., and starting to lay out those timelines. I can't emphasize this enough. Please communicate these deadlines with your auditor and certifier. Otherwise, it's very difficult to be able to meet those deadlines. And also account for the fact that back and forth means you need to have additional time. So you may have said, okay, well, we have a 2-week turnaround for the auditor to go through the process. But if you have not given any wiggle room, it means that if there's any feedback, you've lost your deadline. So accounting for the fact that when information goes back to the different levels, so for example, certifier sends something back to auditor, or auditor sends something back to the client, the whole process starts again. So making sure you're building in wiggle room and feedback time means you'll definitely be able to meet your deadline and not be super crunched for time. But again, communicating deadlines, particularly to Sentali SGS, we do our absolute best to work with external deadlines and to really help you meet your final goals, but we need to know about it as early as possible. Letting us know 2 days before your external deadline for financing when we've been working together for 3 months is really difficult, and we'll still do our absolute best to accommodate, but we are also humans. So again, communicating as early as possible is really, really important. Other tips in terms of the planning is that the Edge application has functionality that allows you to delegate. So you can have one user that has the responsibility of putting together the Edge assessment, but you could delegate uploading documentation to multiple other users, which means that you can really look at the roles and responsibilities of putting together your self-assessments and figure out how to best distribute the workload and help others really contribute to putting together the application and really streamlining the process instead of having one person who could potentially be bottlenecking the process, rather having multiple people working on this Edge assessment at once. The clearer you can define those responsibilities and again, plan your resources, the more effectively you'll be able to go through the process. And our final segment is communication, and I'll pass it over to Fong to take over.
Okay, thank you, Eleni. So after you lay your foundations and have your plans, so the last pillar to structure Edge process is communications. Communications is an essential component of the Edge review. So as an auditor, we rely on the information you provide as clients. That means we need to see things clearly in the document submitted. The way you can communicate clearly is ensuring your clear and simple language. So you point specifically to the part in the documentation provided that proves your points. Ensure the information is not negotiable, but clearly black or white. So at the end of the day, your job is to demonstrate that something has been included in the specification and meets the performance. So that breaks down to is one documents that confirm the performance of the measure, and the other documents that confirm the measure is actually installed or included in the design. So if we think back to the beginning of the presentation and the Edge basic principle, such documentation should already exist. Edge isn't trying to generate the new documentation, but just to select what is appropriate from the existing documents. So when you are doubt about anything, just get your Edge user guide open. So the answer is all in there. So sometimes we get a lot of different documents trying to prove one thing, when in fact, actually just one or two should be fine. The Edge guidance gives you a clear breakdown of exactly what is needed. So let's take an example in a green box on the bottom right of the slides. So when you provide documentation for external shading device, for example, at design stage, you will need to provide all elevation drawings with highlights of the shading device and window details showing the ratio between windows dimensions and the shading depth. The word "and" here means that you need to provide both documents for the verification of auditors. And when it comes to the post-construction stage, what you need to provide is photographs of the shading device, or as-built drawings of the installed device, or the updates of the AASF calculation if there's any change. So, or here means that you only need to submit either of these documents to prove the presence of the shading device. So you don't need to submit all of them. So the best way to communicate is to have a clear audit trail. The EDGE certification process is basically a process of reviewing each audit documents. So the clients will provide the auditor's comments and documents to the auditors to review, and then auditors will review and provide additional comments and recommendations to certifiers, and then the certifier will review everything. So it all starts with you, the clients, and have a clear audit trail. So make sure that you describe how building complies with all of the measures that you have selected. Describe alternative approaches you have employed or alternative documentation that you have provided. Label your documents correctly and reference them in the comments. And last but not least, provide a clear audit trail so that everything can be tracked. So from the auditor's side, we also try to do what we can do to be clear to you when providing feedback. Sometimes there's a lot of time is spent in reviewing assessment, and by clicking in measure in the app to see where the issues are, there's actually a functionality in the EDGE app that provides you a summary of those informations. So here it is. Simply go to your dashboard, click on the projects that you would like to see the comments, scroll down to the bottom of the page, and on the bottom right, you see the 3 dots symbol. Click on that and see a drop-down list and select download audits comment reports. So the audits comment report will pop up. In this audit comments report, you can see the status of all measures that you have selected, whether they have been approved or rejected. Auditors comment including the first audit, second audit, and more if there is any. So they will help you to track on what has been communicated between you and the auditors, and also between the auditors and the reviewers. In a nutshell, so best practice for communication is to use the EDGE guidance as template in writing comments, refer specific documentation in the comments. So for example, please refer to page number 3 of the kitchen faucet specification for the float rate at 3 bar. Last but still important, language should be simple, straightforward, so everyone can understand correctly and clearly.
So if we're to summarize the kind of 3 basic principles that we've talked about so far, it's really focusing in this beginning element, particularly on the client side, of identifying why are you going for EDGE certification, because as we said, that really determines how you're going to then structure your process, really planning your resources as early as possible and mapping out what kind of documentation you will need. If you're working with an EDGE expert, then you move into this preparing this EDGE assessment stage and really trying to meet the EDGE standard and using the EDGE application and the guidance as clearly as possible and following it to lay out the foundation. If you're not using an EDGE expert, that's absolutely fine. That's simply just another task that's sitting on the client side. But really using the information that EDGE is already providing you to communicate in a clear and effective way. And then from our side, you see the auditor really participating in this training. And again, Centali SGS is alongside you throughout this whole process, really helping with some technical training, answering any technical queries, and really supporting you throughout the process, doing the reviews, both on the audit side as well as the certification side. These are really the core principles in terms of structuring your process. We want to shift into a little bit more perhaps technical detail around common mistakes that we've seen around the world that really slow down the process. If you've gone through the EDGE certification process, this is probably going to be a little bit more familiar to you than if you haven't started yet. But these are the things that really tend to cause delays. So I'll pass it back to Phuong for a little bit more detail on that front.
Thanks, Eleni. So from working on hundreds of projects around the world, we have seen that people make similar mistakes that slow down the certification process. So typically these fall into the 3 categories. So the first one will be the inconsistency in the data provided. The second one is the problem with the documentation provided. And then the last one is the mistakes in calculating weighted averages. So the first common mistake is regarding to the sub-projects multipliers versus numbers of buildings versus the numbers of units. So people usually make mistake when entering these data into the Edge app. So for example, a mixed use of projects with 3 identical office buildings that have the same retail podium. So people usually think that it has 3 buildings. However, as these 3 buildings are connected through a podium, it is considered as one distinct buildings. And the correct place to put the 3 buildings is in the sub-project multiplier section for the office sub-projects. So that way you don't have to model the office building 3 times. So in residential buildings, when creating sub-projects, modeling a different unit types, people usually do not pay attention to what data should be the same and what should be changed. So this causes the inconsistency. For instance, the WWR of the 3-bedroom units cannot be different from the WWR of the 1-bedroom units. Both are modeled under the same building with the same WWR, the same ASF, solar reflectance, U value. So in order to avoid this inconsistency, the tips for residential projects that has many sub-projects in the same building is to duplicate the existing sub-projects with attached documentation and rename it to the new sub-projects. Then change what only needs to be changed, like numbers of units, average unit areas, etc. So it will save you a lot of times because you don't have to go over and over again, submit the same documents several times. The second mistake I would like to show here is the glazing calculations. So when doing calculations for AASF, people usually forgot to put in the window areas with no overhang. This causes a difference between the total glazing areas in WWR calculations and the AASF calculations. So the tips is to make sure these 2 numbers match if they are selected. If not, your calculation is incorrect or missing something. Another mistake that clients often forget to put in the default, the value here. So, or they leave it as the default values. So if you don't enter the numbers in these fields, the app will automatically use the default value, which does not reflect the building correctly. So make sure that you put 0.01 if the space does not exist, as this value is sometimes the denominators are in the Edge equation, so it cannot be 0. So if you put 0, then an error will pop up. So these 5 are the file types that are accepted by Edge apps. So please make sure you upload the correct file types. So the key points here is to stick with the requirements of Edge app for documents. Some people just upload a lot of documents into the Edge app without sorting them. For example, WWR requires 2 documents to be submitted. You can see 2 upload buttons with clear description above each. So they require calculations and a facade drawings. I would not submit the site plans or MEP plans or hydraulic plans here because the auditors will not be looking at those. So if you submit unnecessary documents, the auditors will have to open and go through all the files, which means it will prolong the process. So another example is the product specifications like HVAC systems. So you can simply extract a page with the models and COP and then submit only that page instead of submitting the whole catalog of 20 pages. So the keys here is being precise to show the compliance. Naming is also important. So please remember to name your documents in English and name it appropriately. And also refer is in the client comment section so the auditors can find them.
Thanks, Phong. So a lot of information, but really at the end of the day, what we're looking for is that clarity and simplicity. So really focusing on making everyone's life as streamlined and easy as possible, keeping things simple. So whether that's making sure that it's the right number of documents as opposed to submitting 100 documents that then your auditor has to review, making sure to point us in the right direction, and really focusing on how you structure your own internal process so that there aren't internal obstacles happening from your side. I think there's many different ways to go about the EDGE process, and what we want to share with you now are a few case studies from around the world where clients have really successfully navigated processes, and they're quite different, as you'll see. But we wanted to share just a few examples to get you thinking about what makes the most sense for you and for your company, because in reality, there isn't a complete one-size-fits-all process. There are best practices, there are best ways to go about it, but you also have to be able to adapt to what your needs are and how your organization is set up. So let's jump into a few case studies and we'll take a look at how different organizations have navigated the EDGE process.
Okay, so this project is from an EDGE champions in Vietnam. It is a high-rise, affordable apartment focusing on passive design. So they have their internal team train and then delegate one person to be in charge of the coordination amongst the departments and the EDGE expert. So they did the EDGE training not to build the capability to do it by themselves, but to use that to effectively manage the external EDGE expert team. They have all of the milestone and deadline clearly set up upfront, so everything was kept on track at all time, and then they got the project certified within 7 and 10 days. The next one is a project from an industrial park developers. So they are focusing on ready-built factories. So what they have done is to get the EDGE expert involved as early as concept stage. So they have a clear directions on what they want to achieve and have everything ready in advance. So they also built a design guideline for facility that has similar concept. This will shorten down the time for preparing and submitting documents. So as these are ready-built factories, they have also create a mandatory tenant fit-out guideline for the coming tenants. And because of all of these above, like each of the next factories get certified within only 7 days.
Shifting to a different continent, we had an example of a hospital in Ghana recently that was set up very, very quickly to help manage the COVID-19 pandemic. It was about 100 beds, and it was in response to not having enough facilities within the country to be able to handle. And this was put together by a fund of private and public sector participants. And they were able to certify in less than 30 days. And again, some of the processes that they implemented to be able to do that was communicating deadlines up front. This was really important. They came to us, they said, you know, we have this really important deadline. We need to get this done in X date. Can you help us? Can you make it work? And again, as I said earlier, the earlier that you can communicate the deadlines, the more likely it is that we can help you meet those to really make everything work smoothly. What they implemented as well is making sure they did this EDGE self-assessment as early as possible and having everything prepared so that idea of mapping out the documentation, having the documentation as early as possible, knowing where they were, using the EDGE app as early as possible for the design meant that they were able to then go through the process as efficiently as possible. And finally, they had a team of trained EDGE experts involved that knew the application, knew the requirements, and were able to really advise during the process to get through it as quickly as possible. A couple of portfolio examples. We mentioned this in the beginning of the webinar, but there are options to develop bespoke processes to help certify large quantities of buildings. So in the Little Denmark portfolio, we were able to certify, sorry, this is actually Little Lithuania, my apologies. Little Lithuania certified 35 stores and one logistics center in 6 months of registration. And they were able to do that for a variety of different reasons. But in this particular portfolio example, we saw replicability in the designs. And so the team was able to find savings and go through the process efficiently because of the functionality within the Edge app, the ability to do save as, Sintali SGS has also developed a bespoke process for when there's replicability in designs to look at sampling and concepting, which saves a lot of time for the end clients, because instead of doing 37 assessments or 36 assessments in this case, we were able to reduce that amount to have replicability in documentation, reduce the amount of time for the client to go through and find all the documentation relevant. And we also worked very closely with them in the beginning, training a large group of people who were then going to be involved in the project, and also really focusing on this resource planning. So we showed it a little bit earlier, but looking at how many assessments they needed to do, what kind of documentation they would require, etc., and helping them figure out how long that would take for them. I don't think we have it in this presentation, but we've also did something similar for Little Denmark, which is why this is a confusing slide. And Little Denmark did it for 119 buildings. And again, a similar process. So this idea of finding replicability in documentation can be a huge time saver and can help you go through the certification process quite smoothly and effectively, depending on the scale of your project, depending on the design of your project, etc. But that's really an interesting place for process and for savings and going through a streamlined way. Different portfolio project was WDP in Romania, where we certified 45 buildings, and that was done in a couple of months as well. And that again worked because of working together, working closely with a team. Communication of milestones. For WDP, the communication of milestones was very important because they were accessing finance through the Edge certification. And so meeting those milestones was very, very important. So we worked alongside their team and their Edge expert team to really set out a clear plan when they needed to submit documentation by, really putting out deadlines and milestones to be able to meet that goal at the end. WDP was working with a team of experienced Edge experts as well, who were really helping them collect this documentation. This was an existing set of buildings, which can be a little bit more complicated in terms of collecting the documentation. And so this mapping element and really looking for documentation was a huge component of the work. And so there was overlap in documentation, which really helped them. And again, mapping out that in the beginning meant that they were able to identify these overlaps and save time instead of going through the process again and again for all 45 buildings. One final example is Constructora Bolivar in Colombia. So this is a social housing developer, and they have over 38 projects throughout the country with around 20,000 residential units and currently going through certification. Now, they have a very set process within their organization to be able to deliver this program at scale. They have one team that's dedicated to Edge. They've been trained, they know the processes, they know how to go about using it. And they're very efficient internally in terms of having a set of measures that make sense for the different developments, knowing to use the Edge app in the beginning and pre-checking. So they have a different system where they're using it for the concepting, and they're really doing pre-checks and using this internal Edge expert trained team to check and prepare that assessment as early as possible, so that when they go through the certification process, they are ready and they're moving through it really quickly. And again, if they have key deadlines, they're communicating them as early as possible. So they might be working on 10 projects at the same time and get them all certified within a month because they've gone through the checks, because they've been using the Edge app as early as possible, because they're really familiar with the tool and the documentation, and because they're communicating the need for specific deadlines to be met. It goes through very, very smoothly. So there are many different ways of going through the process, and as you can see, clients around the world are really using some of these methodologies and some of these foundations that we've talked about to get through certification in under 30 days in many, many cases. And as Phuong pointed out, in Vietnam, in some cases in as little as 7 days. So there's many things to think about, but if we were to summarize them and give you our key takeaways, the most important thing is really thinking ahead. So the more that you can plan, the more that you can prepare for your Edge process, and the earlier you can start doing that, the better for you, because you can really anticipate potential obstacles. You can really do certain things right in the beginning to ensure that the process is going to be as smooth as possible. Will you be able to predict everything? Probably not, because there's always something that comes up. But the more that you can plan, the more that you can prepare, the easier your journey is going to be. When you are in the process, clarity is key. Make sure you are communicating in clear terms, in black and white terms. This exists, this doesn't exist. This is X performance, this is Y performance. And really focus on the evidence and the proof to really back up your claims, because at the end of the day, EDGE certification is a validation of what you are claiming. And so for us to be able to validate and provide that piece of paper that says that your building is what you say it is, we need to see that in clear black and white terms that this building is meeting the specific requirements. One of the common themes that we saw in our examples from case studies is this idea of EDGE experts or help. So really being able to plan ahead, and also during the process, recognize when you need help, whether you want to outsource it to an EDGE expert or not, whether you want to train somebody internally to be able to use EDGE, or whether you just want to come to your auditor and certifier team and ask for a little bit of support. Recognizing when you need a little bit of guidance can again help save a lot of time and help you have that back and forth of this isn't compliant, or this is too vague, or this isn't working, or we need additional documentation. If you can ask for help and ask for help in an earlier point of time, you can really reduce the back and forth, which, as we know, can cause a lot of delays in the certification process and make it a little bit more difficult and unpleasant. And the final closing thought is focus. Again, EDGE was designed for market transformation. It's really there to help us make sure that every building on this planet, existing and new, is green. It wasn't designed to create problems. It wasn't designed to give your teams tons and tons of other work. It's really designed to ensure we get more green buildings on this planet, and we do it in a transparent, credible, and verified way. And so everything that EDGE is doing is really trying to help us get to that final goal. So the more focused you can be to really know, use the EDGE application, use the guidance, use the basic principles of documents should exist, information should exist, this should be part of your design and construction process, can really take away some of the burden and some of the perhaps perceived complexity of building a green building, and really help you get to the end goal of getting your building certified with EDGE. And with that, I think we will close and open it up to questions. Please, I see a few have come in already, and we'll take a look at those. But if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A chat. If you'd like to discuss the EDGE process or discuss a particular project in more detail, our contact detail is listed on the web on your slide in front of you. Feel free to reach out directly. We'd be more than happy to have a conversation and talk all things EDGE. But first of all, thank you very much for joining us. I will now take a look at some of these questions that we've had. So the first question is, how soon should you start working on your EDGE process, and how early on in the process should you be looking at EDGE? So this really depends on the client and the situation. Typically, we say get started as early as possible, because EDGE is a design tool. It's a decision-making tool. It's really there to be used as early as possible to give you the information you need to make data-driven decisions. So whether you are using it to understand where you are right now, using it to understand a refurbishment strategy or a new design, it's really something that you can implement in the beginning, and it's something that you can use to help you structure your process. So getting in as early as possible is important. In terms of when to sign the EDGE contract and start the certification process, again, that's going to depend on how ready you feel. We have clients that sign and then start working on their assessment, and so it can take a little bit longer. If you really want that short time from point of registration through to certification, then doing the prep ahead of time before starting officially the EDGE process for registration and certification will help you out. I see there's some raised hands. If you could just pop the questions in the Q&A chat instead of raising hands, because we won't be able to unmute people. But if you're able to provide it in the Q&A chat, that would be great. Question for Phuong. So in the examples that you provided with Vietnam, is in your experience, is the 10 days a special case, or are clients able to go through the process frequently, kind of in 30 days or less?
Okay, so as I have mentioned before, so you need to communicate it in advance. So if that is an urgent case, you need to notify us, and then you need to have everything laid out clearly and ready for the auditors to look at. So by doing that, you'll be able to reach the 7 and 10 days.
Perfect. Thank you. So there's a couple questions. Post certification, do we have any building performance monitoring mechanisms available in Edge? So there aren't performance monitoring mechanisms available in Edge, but for clients going through Edge Zero Carbon certification, they'll need to provide their operational data to be able to get the Edge Zero Carbon accreditation. It's currently not automatically linked within Edge. So that would be data being provided from clients through their own way of tracking, through bills and things like that. Another question here. Regarding existing buildings, can Edge be used as a building modeling tool to upgrade an existing building? Absolutely. So Edge is applicable for new designs and for refurbishment retrofit projects. And in fact, I think most of our clients so we've seen a lot in Europe using refurbishment to upgrade existing buildings. And it's been very successful because it's so quantifiable. It really helps you understand what your refurbishment strategy should be to be able to assess kind of the incremental cost versus the efficiency savings of different measures, and develop a plan to be able to refurbish existing buildings and really move them towards improving the building performance. It can be quite challenging in many cases if the building is very old, because the baseline and the building regulations for the building are going to be quite different than what the current regulations are. But it is a very, very useful tool for existing buildings, so absolutely relevant. Based on our experience, are there templates ready to estimate the number of man hours and days required of different types and scales of projects? We have some estimates from our side. It really depends, what we found, on the team that's looking at doing the assessment, their experience, their understanding and ability to use the Edge application, and really most importantly, the documentation available. So there's no sort of set template to say, okay, if you're working on a residential project, then every assessment for typology is going to take you 8 hours to put together, because it's going to depend very, very much on your ability to pull the documentation, what documentation is available, if there's different people involved, etc. We typically work with clients to understand their specific case, as opposed to saying it's going to take you a specific number of hours. But we can definitely get in contact with you with a little bit more detail on that. There's a question here about the difference between Edge and Lead. So Edge is quantifiable, so there are no qualitative elements within Edge, and it's focused on 3 areas. So it's focused on the energy efficiency, water efficiency, and embodied energy and materials. And really that the Edge app and the quantifiable focus on the resource efficiency is kind of its unique selling point. Lead covers a broader variety of categories, and it has a mixture of different elements. So I'd say those are kind of the key differences from that side. Sorry, I'm just reading and clicking things. So what are best practices to translate Edge Zero Carbon after getting Edge certification? So I think with Edge Zero Carbon, it's a really powerful certification, because it's the future, right? So we hear all the time everywhere about zero carbon. This country is committed to net zero emissions, this company is committed to net zero emissions, et cetera, et cetera. So we're seeing massive changes in the market. What we're also seeing is a massive confusion in the market, because there's 10 different definitions of net zero. There's net zero energy, net zero carbon, nearly net zero, and positive and climate neutral and all kinds of different things. So in terms of the value of Edge Zero Carbon, it's that it is, again, a quantifiable and verifiable way for a company to prove that their building is zero carbon, and it's a renewable certificate, so it's renewed every 2 to 4 years. So there's a constant element of, you haven't just done something and then you're done, but it's this constant performance improvement and focusing on renewable energy and really trying to shift towards a sustainable future. So I think in terms of the best practice of how to translate Edge Zero Carbon after Edge certification is working with your clients to really discuss the changes that are happening in the market, both in terms of the regulations that are going to come, in terms of investors asking for zero carbon and generally the market demand, and really pushing them towards Edge Zero Carbon as the way of the future and really where the entire market is going. So getting in on it now and getting the additional benefits of being leaders in the space and getting additional marketing value, or waiting until it's then mandatory and then you can follow the trend. I'm just going to pause here and say Phuong's going to jump off because he has to go do an Edge handover certification ceremony. So thank you very much for joining us, Phuong. I'll stay on for a couple more minutes and answer a few more questions that are coming through. But thanks so much for joining us, Phuong.
Okay, see you.
Good luck with the ceremony.
Thank you.
So a couple more questions on this zero carbon and Edge certification. So there's a question here around whether the Edge certification and Edge Advanced certifications need to be renewed to be maintained. So if you get an Edge certified or Edge Advanced project, that is an evergreen certificate. So that does not need to be renewed because it's based on the asset and how the asset was designed and built. So unless you go through a major refurbishment, one certification is all you go through for Edge. If you go for the Edge Zero Carbon, that is renewed every 2 to 4 years. And the reason that one is renewed is because it's based on the operational energy. And because that changes all the time, that's why you have that renewal element. So the Edge up to Edge Advanced is about the asset, and it's about how efficient you've designed and built your building. And then the Edge Zero Carbon is about the operations. And so that is the renewable certificate. So I'm just going to read this out loud because it's quite large. So as a sustainability consultant, many clients want to submit requests for green financing, but the bank needs proof. So there's a question here about if clients can use CAD plans. Okay, multiple questions. So one around for clients looking for submitting green financing, kind of where does Edge fit in? And then a second question around if clients need to use Edge experts or if they can just use their own in-house team to go through the Edge assessment and kind of what time frames are typically done for the self-assessment. So question one around financing. So Edge can be really powerful to access financing because of the preliminary certificate. So a lot of our clients are going through the Edge certification process, certifying that their design is green, and then taking that to banks to say, you know, we've gone through this process, the design is certified, we will eventually build it, please give us financing. And there's many different financial institutions around the world that allow that and can offer sometimes preferential loans or green bonds and green finance for that. So it's absolutely done, it's effective, and it's actually one of the biggest drivers in the market is because investors are asking for green credentials, and because Edge is quantifiable and backed by the World Bank, it really is a win-win to have an Edge certificate to take to a bank, and it's a very good credential. You do not need an Edge expert to go through the Edge certification process. It can be really helpful. And again, it depends on just how you structure your team and what resources you have available. But Edge is a very user-friendly tool, and it has a lot of guidance within it. So you don't need to be a trained Edge expert. You don't need to hire an Edge expert. You can do it in-house with your engineering team. And we have a lot of clients that do it. It really depends on, again, how your company is set up, where you want to spend your resources, etc. But the time frame for putting together a self-assessment, again, can really depend on the type of project, type of documentation, your experience with Edge. But if you, I mean, my my MD always says, you know, if you know your building, you can do an initial edge self-assessment in 30 minutes. Now, granted, that's not putting together all the documentation, but if again, the application is really telling you what you need to do, where you need to put information, etc. So it really is about user-friendly design. And if you know your building, you can really go through the process effectively. Let me just make sure I have answered all my questions. I think I have answered everything. Oh, no, sorry, there's one more question and then we will wrap it up. What is the criteria to define a building as an existing building? So if you go onto the edgebuildings.com website, you can find a lot of information around the methodology and kind of the criteria, but typically it would have to be older than 3 years, and then there's older than 5 years to get specific credits. But generally, it's a building that's already been constructed and is in operation, and that would be an existing building. So if your building is being built, you might fall into the preliminary category and be able to certify the design, or you might go straight to post-construction. It kind of depends on what kind of building you are and kind of what the value of the certification is for you. But typically, you're looking at a building that's essentially in operation, being defined as an existing building. Do we need to submit documents for a self-assessment, or documents are only needed for the actual auditing? So there's different layers. So the Edge app is the free software tool, and you can use it just to assess where your building is and get a sense of your efficiency and kind of what you're doing compared to a local baseline. No documentation required. Documentation is required if you want to go through the certification process. So as soon as you've signed a certification agreement and started the registration and certification process, that's when you need to submit documentation. You will need to submit documentation whether you're going for the preliminary certification or the post-construction. So for the design stage, you need to submit documents showing that you are implementing certain measures in your design. And then for the post-construction, you'll need to submit the actual documents showing that the building has been constructed as designed. So documentation is needed for both stages. It's not needed if you're just using the Edge app to compare your building and to use it as a design tool, let's say. Does Sintali offer a service to support clients in the self-assessment? If yes, how can we receive recommendation? So Sintali is a certifier, so we cannot do consulting because that is a conflict of interest, but we have a network of Edge expert partners in India and around the world who can help you in that self-assessment process. We, as part of our package, so Sintali and SGS, we do a kickoff meeting with our clients when they're signed off for going through the process, and we do training in that time where you'll get a little bit more familiar with Edge. We'll talk through what kind of documents you'll need. So you do get a little bit of training during the process, but if you want a lot of hands-on support, we can absolutely connect you with our Edge expert partners to support you in that process. But absolutely, please do get in touch. Contact information is on the screen. I'd be happy to talk about this further and kind of understand the specific needs of the project. Again, it really depends on what kind of help you need. You know, we offer a fair amount of help in general, but also can connect you with our partner network for a really deep dive as well. So I think with that, I will wrap it up. If you have any other questions, please do feel free to reach out to myself and Sanjay. If you are based in India, Sanjay is your local contact and is available. I'm available as well, just different time zones. So, you know, we're both here to help and support you on your journey. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully this was helpful and educational, and we again look forward to working with you all and getting more green buildings around the world.
Thank you all for joining. Thanks, Eleni.
Thank you, and have a lovely weekend.
Same to you. Thanks.
And just to answer the last question, sorry, yes, this is recorded and you will be getting a copy of the recording and the slides, hopefully later today or by Monday, so you can always rewatch. Thank you all. Bye-bye.